Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And the NFL preseason in 2017 has officially concluded. The Minnesota Vikings finished up not very strong with a nice 30-9 loss against the Miami Dolphins at home against the, at US Bank Stadium. So not the best way to close out the preseason, but we are finally on to the regular season, and that's kind of a win in itself. So what we're going to do here, obviously, final rosters, the 53-man roster will be announced on Saturday. I believe it's 3 p.m. Central Time that the Vikings have to have all their cuts in. So what we're going to do on this show is we're going to talk quickly, kind of briefly, about what we saw from the bubble players against the Dolphins. So this is primarily going to be stuff from guys like Caleb Jones, who really stood out, Jaleel Johnson, who had a really nice game, that type of thing. And then we'll jump immediately into our 53-man roster prediction show type ordeal segment. I don't know. So Drew and I put together our own 53-man rosters pretty quickly here, and we're gonna have a little competition to see who can get the W there, and we'll finish this whole thing out with our Mr.
That this competition will be riding pretty heavily on about 2 or 3 spots, but
yeah. But we'll get to that later on in the show. So let's start out here with our note from our sponsor, as always, from Black Stack Brewing. Brand new brewery smack dab in the middle of Minneapolis and St. Paul, with a wide range of clean and flavorful brews and a massive bright tap room, perfect for intimate settings, all the way to special events. That is Black Stack Brewing, 755 North Pryor, just north of Menards, off of University Avenue. And then shout out to our sponsors over at Twin Cities Directory, the best way to explore delicious bites and fun-filled nights in that Minneapolis and St. Paul have to offer. Check it out at www.twincities.directory. That's www.twincities.directory. Helping you discover the real Twin Cities. So, Drew, let's start off here with the Miami Dolphins game. Like I said to open the show, the Vikings kind of got dismantled. There's another sloppy performance, kind of a theme of the preseason. Started off very slow and ultimately met their demise at a 30-9 final score. Mike Zimmer's record now gets pushed to, 14-3 now all time?
It must be 13-3. Well, it could be 14-3.
Yeah, because he had the Hall of Fame game.
Hall of Fame, yeah, okay.
So 14-3 all time for Mike Zimmer now in the preseason. Couple guys that stood out for me. We'll try to do this real fast because I think the 53-man roster projection is really the focal point of this episode. Caleb Jones, obviously, 9 catches, 10 targets, 127 yards. The box score tells you that he had a very nice night. On top of that, he was fundamentally strong. He was running great routes. He made Mitch Leidner look good a couple of times, though I will say Leidner did drop in an absolute dime. The best throw I've ever seen Leidner make in his entire career.
Wow.
Down the sideline into Caleb Jones's hands. That was probably the best throw of the night. That includes Taylor Heineke, who does not make my strong list of performances.
Did Mitch Leidner outperformed Taylor Heineke tonight?
Not in my mind. I think some people will. I think some people will tell you that he did.
I will tell you that.
Well, you're wrong. I mean, Mitch Leidner did not look good. He
didn't have to look good. He had to look average or.
Okay, well, Heineke, by my count, had 4 passes dropped on him. 1 by Treadwell, 1 by, I think it was...
That Treadwell ball was pretty good.
There's a couple of balls that should have been caught. Heineke's performance should have been better than it was, but it wasn't, obviously. He didn't look good. He looked injured. On top of not playing well, he looked injured. During the safety, the end zone, obviously that was atrocious. That was Aviante Collins getting beat off the edge, and Heineke really not knowing what to do with the football fast enough. Just a bad situation all around in the back. Backed up against the end zone and results in 2 points for a safety. So just another one of the miscues for the Vikings. But getting back to guys that did play well tonight, Caleb Jones was effective as a route runner, creating separation. I think that he really vaulted his status to being more of a bubble player. I think that he's still, I think you'll see during our 53-man roster projections that Drew and I differ on where we think he's going to end up, but he's definitely in the conversation to be the Vikings' 6th wide receiver, with Michael Floyd set to be suspended to start the year with this type of performance. Other than him, though, I mean, Jaleel Johnson, I know that you're happy about seeing him getting off to another nice start, couple good plays in run defense, but as a whole, Drew, do you really see anyone of these bubble guys, these Vikings of the future, as some like to call them, the practice squad invitees, that group, do you see anything really impressive from this group tonight?
and not really that we hadn't already seen. You saw a couple plays from Tayshaun Bauer, but I would say it was his worst preseason game. But that still means it was rock solid, I think. You had Eric Wilson made a nice play. I believe he blew up a screen. But he'd already done that before too. So I think you just had. It was in this type of game too. When it's a blowout like this, it's really tough for guys to get meaningful game situation reps.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think nothing really changed that really made the coaching staff think and kind of change what they maybe had going into the game as far as their roster spots and whatnot. So, the same guys I had before this game are going to be on the roster. It didn't change anything for me.
Yeah, I think Caleb Jones for me, I'll just give this away. I'm going to have him on my 53-man roster. He's the only one for me that really vaulted his status from being a borderline guy to being a 53-man roster guy. And if Michael Floyd wasn't suspended, for the record, then he would be a cut regardless, because Floyd would be in the top 6, and that would push him over the line. So not a great day for the Vikings. I feel like we've been saying that far too often lately. It was not a good preseason as a whole. It's good to finally get out of the preseason, and hopefully, a lot of the skepticisms about this team will be answered week 1 against the New Orleans Saints. But at the same time, I think there is reason to worry about a couple of areas. I don't think anything was exposed tonight, but I do think the slot cornerback thing is an issue. When you see Mackenzie Alexander getting reps well into the second quarter, and he's supposed to be your starting slot guy, I think that you're probably, at least it signals to me that Mike Zimmer isn't very confident in his slot cornerback to start the year. I thought that Laquan Treadwell actually looked pretty good again tonight. I think that he's going to start the year, and he's going to have an opportunity to really steal that job, something that we talked about way earlier in the preseason, way early, like back in OTAs when he was, showing out in OTAs. It looks like he's going to have an opportunity to actually steal that number 3 receiver spot, because he is coming back pretty strong, I think. Other than Jones and Treadwell, not really too many highlights for me to mention here tonight. I don't know. Stacey Coley was even pretty quiet tonight.
Yeah, it was 30-9, and I thought the backup offensive line was not very good. I praised Willie Beavers for his performance against San Francisco. He did not do the same thing tonight against Miami. So it's I would like to point out, I mentioned Marquise Gray as a tight end weapon, and he scored a touchdown. So sometimes if you're looking for a correct football analysis, just listen to the About the Labor podcast, because I'm on the show. But no, it's there wasn't a whole lot to take from this game as far as altering what you thought of the roster of the team before this game. It was a bad performance all around, but I think you're knowing about Mackenzie Alexander is a fair point. Something I've been harping on all offseason ever since Captain Marlin was let go was you have to solidify that slot cornerback position. It's the hardest position on defense to play, and it's very easy for teams to expose it. And if you can't have somebody in that spot that is reliable and that's less than 38 years old, because Terrence Newman is getting some reps there now, that it's clearly they don't trust Mackenzie Alexander there if he's playing into the second half of a 4th preseason game. That's a problem, and they might address it after the cuts or via trade or whatever. But it's certainly an issue for this defense, and I feel like Drew Brees might know how to take advantage of it. Yeah,
that's a good point. I definitely think that after the 53-man roster cuts are made around the league, I think that you'll see the Vikings at the very least go out and pick someone that just lost their job somewhere else at the cornerback's position, because as you'll see with our cornerback depth charts, it's pretty much slim pickings behind Rhodes when you consider that Newman hasn't looked good this preseason and Waynes has been injured and also not looked great either. It's becoming a greater and greater issue as the weeks progress, and you see both the Saints and the Steelers on the schedule early. That's kind of scary stuff when you are worried about the cornerback position. But at the same time, I think that some of it is still overblown. It is still the preseason. I think the Vikings will come out a lot stronger. I still, we'll talk about this obviously next week on the preview for the Saints show. But I'm still pretty confident in this team. I don't have any major concerns beyond the slot cornerback one. I honestly think the offensive line progressed as this preseason went on. I thought Remmers was overall subpar, but I thought he got it done in the run game, and he was subpar, not maybe a little below average as a pass protector. And Reef was very solid. I thought Hill was very solid. I think this offensive line is going to give Sam Bradford enough protection this year. I do feel confident in that moving in here, and that's one of the biggest question marks of this offseason. What we would end up having as a front five heading into the regular season, and I can confidently say it's definitely better than last year, and I would expect it to give Bradford enough time in the pocket. So unless you've got any final takeaways from this Miami game,
I think so.
Yeah, really not a whole lot to say. I wish I had more.
Let's move past that. 30-9 blowout in a fourth preseason game that does not matter.
Let's just mention, first of all, I'll give 3 takeaways from this game. 1, Sam Brown, the cornerback that was basically unknown, he's getting cut for sure now. He wasn't even a bubble player, and then he came out and was not good at all during this game against the Dolphins. Number 2, Jabari Price kind of went from being a bubble guy for me and probably did himself a disservice by not tackling efficiently, not being in good position in coverage, and for that reason I actually cut him off my 53-man roster. So that's one more guy that actually kind of had an impact one way or the other during this game. And then the final one, I think that I thought that the quarterback depth chart was probably solved heading in. I thought Keenum probably was going to be the number 2 and number 2 alone, but Heineke definitely didn't give enough to argue for more than a practice squad spot. He did not have a good preseason overall, not a good training camp, which is disappointing. But he'll move forward, and I'm sure that we'll see Heineke back out with the Vikings next summer with an opportunity to take the backup spot back again next year. So. That's about it from the Dolphins game. Let's move on to this 53-man roster because I think this is probably going to take us a good fraction of the show to actually lay out what we're talking about. So before we get into offense and defense, let's just knock out special teams quickly since it is very simple, and I think we only disagree on one spot. Kicker, we're both going Kai Forbath here, right? Marshall Kane missed the extra point tonight.
He kicked himself out of it, so.
I think Marshall Kane did kick himself out of it. We talked about on the last show how he's inconsistent and how Kai Forbath offers that upside just simply from a consistency standpoint, and Kai Bath kind of put the nail in his own coffin there. Kai Bath. Kane.
I thought you were just trying to save space there.
Kane, like Drew said, kicked himself out of it by missing that extra point and proving that he's kind of inconsistent as a young kicker at this point. So both of us are on the Kai Forbath train. Punter, Quigley or Simek?
I got Quigley. It just seems like, not that I actually prefer him. I like him in that I think he's been the better directional punter, but he seems to be the guy that's been the holder. He's been the first guy off the bench in the rotation, and I don't think he's really done anything to lose that job. So I think Quigley's going to be the guy.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with that, but I'm going to go with Simek simply because I think that you're right and that the team has used Quigley more often, and it would be less of a shock to see him make the roster. But I simply think Simek's been the better punter, straight up. I have been very impressed with what he's been able to do, both booming it downfield and direction from a directional standpoint. So I'm going to go with Simek, so I guess that's one spot that we disagree on. And the long snapper, I think we're pretty locked in on Kevin McDermott being the guy. Yeah. So
I was going to put Jared Allen in there, but I decided on McDermott. So. Yeah.
All right, then. So let's move on to the offense, starting with the quarterback position. I foreshadowed my answer already, so let's start with you, Drew. How many quarterbacks are keeping, and what are their names?
Teddy Bridgewater, 1. Just kidding. Sam Bradford, obviously, and Case Keenum. I don't think there's really much question here. I thought Keenum, for one thing, I will say, I think Keenum really outperformed kind of my expectations in the preseason.
I will say that. From the Heineke fan club, we can admit.
Yeah,
you were
anti-Keenum the entire camp preseason, and
I did come around though during training camp when he was slapping guys' butts because I laughed at that and I liked him on a.
So that's what changes your. Okay, I see how you analyze football.
Yeah, that's
you see,
exactly how well they slap butts, how consistently, how which cheek they landed on. It's very analytical. It's very Jason Brown-esque, the process that I go through. So.
Okay, but I really do think I've gained a lot more. Well, I guess he has gained a lot more trust from at least the fan base and from myself as a backup quarterback to Bradford in the event of a Bradford injury, and if Teddy is still on the pup. I think you can still win with Case Keenum at quarterback. So that, I think, in itself overall made me kind of think of the quarterback position as a win in the preseason. Like the position got better, So I like that. So, but anyway, for me, a quarterback, Bradford Keenum, and I don't think it's much of a question.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that. I think that Heineke had an opportunity to come out tonight and make it more debatable whether the Vikings would keep 3 quarterbacks. I think that is still a possibility, but I think that given the emergence of guys like Tayshaun Bauer and needing to roster possibly 4 tight ends, I think that that's going to be the difference here. And the fact that Taylor Heineke is practice squad eligible and Teddy Bridgewater is going to start. He
needed to play well tonight to have that. I mean, he didn't. So
and he didn't. Yeah, he did not play well enough to earn a roster spot tonight. So I've got 2 quarterbacks as well: Sam Bradford, Case Keenum. No difference there for Drew and I. Running backs. Let's also mix in fullback into this to keep the show moving along here. I've got Dalvin Cook up top as the featured back. I think we talked about it on the last show. I expect him to be the guy moving forward, getting about 70% of the touches, maybe 65. Something in that area. Then Latavius Murray, Jerick McKinnon, and then also I'm keeping C.J. Ham as a fullback. My main reason for that is because I'm trying to be as accurate as possible here, and the Vikings not playing him during this preseason game signals to me that they plan to keep a fullback, and that C.J. Ham, given that he's the only fullback on the roster, is going to be that guy.
Right. I mean, I agree with everything you said here. I think, I will say I think there's a possibility that they didn't play C.J. Ham because they know through 3 games if they want a fullback or not, and so it really doesn't matter, I guess, if he plays or not. But I guess I would still lean towards him being on the roster regardless, which I think that's pretty cool. Guy from Augustana, Division II player, changing positions, bulking
nice guy
up.
Too.
And, the nicest guy on the face of the earth, unless, you Teddy files, I guess, could say Teddy as well. But,
CJ
both
Ham's
those guys are
right
super
there.
nice guys, yes.
All right, so no disagreement there. So our only disagreement so far, Simek and Quigley. How about that? Moving on to the wide receiver position, I think we'll probably get a disagreement here because this is the most loaded positional depth chart, in my opinion, as it relates to the Vikings. I've got Diggs and Thielen up top. No surprise there. After that, it would be Treadwell, Floyd, but Floyd is starting the year suspended, so obviously I'm not going to have him in my top 6. Instead, replacing him in that number 4 slot is Jarius Wright. Number 5 would be Stacey Coley. And then I've got Caleb Jones rounding it out at 6. That means I am not keeping Rodney Adams on the 53-man roster. I'm moving him to the practice squad, setting him on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I think I do have one disagreement, but I think the top 5 guys are all the same. Thielen, Diggs, Treadwell, Wright, Coley, and then I have Rodney Adams still sliding in there. Despite a rather disappointing month of August, and I still think the team. You know how Rick Spielman is with his draft picks.
Right.
A 5th round guy like that, I feel like they're going to find a way to keep him on the roster and maybe work him in if needed as a gadget guy like Patterson. So I think they're still going to keep him, although I personally wouldn't, but I think the team plans on keeping him there. So, and then obviously Floyd suspended, and then I believe when Floyd does come back, I think then Adams, I hope it anyway, it's Adams that is the casualty when that happens.
Right, and then for my list, obviously when Floyd comes back, Caleb Jones is the guy that gets cut. So from there, so now we've got 2 disagreements for Drew and I. Moving on to the tight end position, I think we'll probably get another disagreement here. I'm only going to keep 3 tight ends, but I don't think it's the 3 that you're probably expecting. I've got Kyle Rudolph, David Morgan, and Kyle Carter. I'm sending Bucky Hodges to the practice squad to start the year here.
Yep, that's what I have too, actually. So
okay, all right. So keeping it simple.
Part of it too, I will say, like there was a concussion protocol for him tonight, and we don't. I mean, we don't know where that is, but that played into it for me a little bit. If I was on the fence, I kind of leaned toward not keeping him. So
Fair enough. Yeah, obviously Kyle Rudolph is going to be the starter. David Morgan has locked himself in as the number 2 guy. We knew that, 3 weeks ago on David Morgan. And then Kyle Carter has been consistently strong through training camp, into the preseason, and finished strong with another good night tonight. I don't think the box score reflects the performance I saw from him, because he did have a catch called back at one point, ran some nice routes, blocked well. I thought Kyle Carter just produced a very strong, well-rounded preseason overall. That's why he's on my 53-man roster. So on to offensive linemen. Now, this is going to probably get interesting. Instead of doing it as tackle, guard, center, we're going to group them all into a group just called offensive linemen. You see offenses keep anywhere between 8 and sometimes I've seen up to about 11 before on a 53-man roster. Drew and I differ here. I know that for a fact. Up top, though, I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. On the left side to start the year, Riley Reif and Alex Boone. No shock there, assuming that Boone is healthy. After that, I'm going to start Elflein at center. I think Easton very possibly could be the starting center, but I'm going to have him as the other guy. On the right side, then, you got Joe Berger at right guard and Mike Remmers. So that's my starting 5. Backing those guys up, then, I've got Danny Isidora, who had a very strong night against the Dolphins. Nick Easton, Rashad Hill, who I think will be the first man off the bench if Remmers struggles early. And then Willie Beavers. And then I'm going to sneak Jeremiah Searles in there as well. I thought Beavers actually had a very strong training camp and preseason overall. And Searles makes it by just the slimmest of margins. I know I could have gone Hodges there instead of Searles, but I'm going to keep the veteran on there because there are so many new faces in this Vikings offensive line that some continuity there is probably in the best interest of this team. And as you may have noticed, TJ Clemmings is not in that group, so I have him getting cut this year.
Yeah, I have 9 of your 10. So I have one fewer offensive lineman than you do, and the one I left off was Willie Beavers. I think his performance against Miami, I guess I said that didn't make a difference for any of the players, and I guess this would be one that is a contrast to that statement. So Willie Beavers, his performance last week was kind of lifted him into my 53, and this week he kind of fell out. So that's where I stand with him. But I think Reif, Boone, Elflein, Berger, Remmers is your starting 5. Then you have Hill as a swing tackle backing them up. You have Easton, who can play all 3 interior positions, and then you have Searles and Isadora as well for depth. So
sounds about right to me. All right, so a couple disagreements on the offensive side of the ball. Let's move over to the defensive side of the football here. Starting with defensive end. Pretty obvious up top. It's towards the back of the defensive end roster where I think it gets a little bit murky. But obviously Everson Griffin, obviously Danielle Hunter, obviously Brian Robinson. And then I'm going to keep both Stephen Weatherly and Tayshawn Bauer here. I thought both guys earned roster spots. It's a little bit unusual to keep 5 defensive ends. It's not foreign by any means. Teams do it every year, but most of the time you see teams keep 4 defensive ends. But I've got to keep 5 here simply because there's no way you can let Bauer go, and Weatherly played well enough to be rosterable, in my opinion.
Right. I actually, I had something different before the show, but I just changed it like literally just now. I am going to go Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter as the starters, and my depth guys are going to be Brian Robinson, Tayshawn Bauer, and Ifedi Odenegbo. I'm adding Odenegbo to the roster here. Weatherly and Odenegbo, I think, kind of had similar camps and preseasons. I saw Odenegbo flash quite a bit in the one-on-one drills, and I think Odenegbo as a 7th-round pick this season, I feel like he might have a slight advantage there. So I'm going to go with him. Might not be the proper pick, but I'm going to be aggressive here and try and steal one from you. So I'm going to keep Odenegbo on the 53.
All right. Sounds good to me. I mean, I don't disagree that Odenegbo had a good camp and a good preseason. I mean, but I still go back to the thing that we talked about early with him, in that he's a pass rusher first at this point in his career that needs to learn how to play better defense as a run defender. And didn't show me enough to be a 53-man roster player this year, but I do expect him to be a guy that's going to improve in the coming years. I expect him to be on the Vikings practice squad and play well from there and kind of move his way up, because I think he's got a lot of talent and he's a very smart, charismatic person as well. So wish him the best. I just don't see him on the 53 this year. Let's move on to defensive tackle then. We'll do a combination of nose tackle and under tackle here. Linval Joseph is obviously making this roster. I've got
bold prediction.
Yeah, real bold there. Immediately after him, I've got Tom Johnson as the starter at the 3 technique spot, with Jaleel Johnson being right on his heels there. I'm keeping Shamar Stephen, though I do think he's a very strong candidate to be traded immediately after 53-man rosters are announced. And for that reason, I think you could see some shuffle there. I've got Detone Jones getting the last defensive tackle spot, not Will Sutton, though I do think that Will Sutton played pretty solid against Miami and probably earns a 53-man roster spot somewhere. I think that Stephen is the guy that gets traded here, and I think he very well could be. You could see the Vikings release Sutton only to sign him back, 48 hours later or something like that.
Right, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, Sutton's going to find a job somewhere, I think, after this. I think he's kind of right on that fringe where there's a lot of guys in this defensive tackle depth chart that just doesn't allow for room for Sutton, but I think another team will possibly grab him if there's not a trade made, like you mentioned. So then he could be brought back. But I do have the same guys as you, Linval Joseph, Tom and Jaleel Johnson, Shamar Stephen, and Detone Jones at the defensive tackle position.
All right, moving on to linebacker then. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, no doubt. We've seen the rookie Ben Gideon come in and play extremely well. I've got him there, no doubt. That moves us into where it gets questionable here in the linebacker depth chart. I think a lot of people want to cut Emmanuel Lemur, and I am going to cut Emmanuel Lemur. That leaves me here with 3 guys. I'm going Eric Wilson. Despite the size concerns, I think that he had a phenomenal preseason. I think that he's at the very least an elite caliber special teams player. I expect a lot from Eric Wilson. That's why he's making the roster. Edmund Robinson is probably going to be my starter. Maybe Ben Gideon. I don't know, at that weak side linebacker spot. It's going to be Ben Gideon or Edmund Robinson, one of the two. That's why Robinson's probably going to start the year. I'll say he's the backup to Gideon starting week 1. Then Kentrell Brothers also makes the roster. Now healthy, he's one of the best special teamers on this team. I think you've got to keep him as well. Yeah,
I agree. I have about the same 6. I agree in that Emmanuel Lemur's days are very much numbered in Minnesota, and what I mean by that is he will be gone within 48 hours. So it's if you don't make the roster or a starting job at this point in your career, he's 28, 29, been playing for 5 seasons now, and you have a bunch of mid to late round rookies behind you. It's kind of you should be getting that starting job by now, and if you don't, and you have a rather easy salary dump.
Yeah,
you're gone. That's just the way it works. It's business. So I do think. I mean, I would have loved to see Edmund Robinson step up a little bit more in camp and preseason than he did to kind of grasp that starting job, and he hasn't. So it looks like Gideon could be your starter week 1.
Yeah. It's either going to be Gideon or Robinson. You saw both of those players get a little bit of a run here during this 4th preseason game. So the Vikings are not tipping their hand in that regard. We probably won't know who the starter will be up until next week at some point, because why tell Sean Payton who your starter is going to be if it's up in the air? So I don't see the Vikings revealing that until probably Saturday or Sunday-ish, as I think we'll probably figure that out ahead of the Vikings game against the Saints. So moving on to cornerback now. This is a depth chart that I wasn't concerned about it coming into the year. Let me say it like this: I wasn't as concerned as Drew was coming into the year, but Alexander, not a good camp.
But now you are as concerned as me.
I'm not as concerned as you. I'm concerned though. I do recognize that there is an issue here, and I think that my safety depth chart will kind of reflect my concern at cornerback as well. But at cornerback, I've got Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, Terrence Newman. No shocker on those 3. Mackenzie Alexander. He's a second-round pick. He's going to make it this year. The camp, I think without the status of being a second-round pick and without his college career, he did not have a good enough training camp or preseason to warrant a roster spot. But because of his status, because of his potential, you got to keep Alexander around, and he's probably going to be your starter at the nickel spot to start the year, unless that's Terrence Newman. But we'll see on that. And then finally, I'm not keeping 6 cornerbacks this year. I'm prone to keeping 6 cornerbacks, partially because I love cornerbacks, partially because I know Zimmer loves cornerbacks. But I'm only keeping 5 this year, and number 5 is Marcus Sherrills. And anytime Marcus Sherrills is your number 5 cornerback, you have to expect that this team needs to improve their depth. So I'm cutting Trey Roberson, and I'm cutting Jabari Price are probably the 2 main names here that are getting the cut from me. Price just didn't show me enough this preseason to warrant that final spot there at cornerback.
Yeah, we have the same again, the same 5 guys. I will say that I think Terrell Singfield for a little bit was on the border of making this roster. He was really impressive. And I mean, for a guy that was playing receiver, 12 months ago, and he turned it around so quickly, and he looks so fluid at the position. I'm hoping they can keep on the practice squad because I think if he's not the absolute worst option to bring up in the event of an injury to kind of provide that depth that Marcus Sherrills probably can't. So I think obviously Sherrills just on this team for his punt return duties. And then you have Rhodes, Newman, Waynes, Alexander. So yeah, the depth is a problem. Waynes is he's always going to be beaten by those short, quick twitch routes. Newman's 55 years old now.
Yep.
Mackenzie Alexander is proven to be inconsistent still, and even throughout the preseason. And then Marcus Sherrills is Marcus Sherrills. So clearly some issues there. And if the Vikings do suffer some injuries, it's going to be a long season there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And like I just said during the defensive tackle breakdown, I fully expect the Vikings to go out and get another cornerback. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if that's going to mean trading a surplus at defensive tackle, a guy like Shamar Stephen, for example. But they're going to go get another cornerback. Somehow, some way, they're going to add another cornerback to this team. I just don't see any way around it. That depth chart just isn't strong enough. Very top-heavy. Very, very top-heavy depth chart. At a position that was arguably the greatest strength for the Vikings just 1 season ago. We're very, very worried about it. So that tells you how much football can change in a blink of the eye. Moving on to the safety spot, I have obviously Harrison Smith and Anderson Dejo pegged in as the starters. Then I'm keeping Jaron Kearse and then Antone Exum, who has been extremely impressive, fighting all front to back. He's been extremely impressive playing both at the slot cornerback position and at safety. He sneaks in there instead of Anthony Harris for me.
Yeah, Antone Exum really has a nose for the ball, and I think we've seen that throughout preseason and kind of in camp since he really arrived as a Viking. And that's also, a little bit of a boost to the cornerback depth that I just talked about. He's been playing that nickel position. Honestly, he might even be the starter at this point at that nickel position, given the way Mackenzie Alexander has played. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. So I think he's a shoe-in to make the team at this point, which I did not see happening a month ago.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And then you have, obviously, Harrison Smith and Anderson Dejo as your starters, and Jaron Kearse. And I have Anthony Harris in there as well, because I think Exum is kind of a hybrid between safety and cornerback. And I feel like Mike Zimmer would want to have an additional safety back there, and I think Anthony Harris is that guy. So I have 5 safeties with Harris rounding out that group.
Right, okay. So, not too many huge differences for Drew and I on our respective 53-man roster projections. The big ones being that I'm keeping 10 offensive linemen, you're keeping 5 safeties. We differ on Rodney Adams versus Caleb Jones at the wide receiver spot, but pretty much everything else.
And then Weatherly and Odenigbo.
Yeah,
made that change too.
Yeah. So those are really the only big, question, I guess, up for grabs and differences that we have on our 53-man roster here. So let's finish this up here. We didn't mention kick return or punt return. I think it's pretty locked in that Marcus Sherrills is going to be the punt return guy. We don't need to talk about that. And do you see it as Marcus Sherrills and Jerick McKinnon being back there to opening week 1?
I think it will be Jerick McKinnon, and I think Rodney Adams will be like the number 2 guy, I guess. I don't know. The Vikings generally don't kind of have a return formation. Mike Prefer hasn't really done this where he's got 2 guys both back instead of one. Normally just had, but that's also because he's had Cordero Patterson. So maybe that changes with two guys still trying to kind of prove themselves. But I do think McKinnon will be the bulk kick return guy, and I think at punt returner it will be Marcus Sherrills without a doubt. And I think in the event of an injury, I think it'll be Stacy Coley.
All right, so that about wraps up the 53-man roster projections.
We have a couple
Twitter
tweets.
things? All right, so let's finish.
Our guy Eli, who, by the way, if you haven't seen his Twitter profile, he tweeted a picture of the shirt he won by giving us a review on iTunes during our game during training camp. We'll get another one of those up soon. So if you want to get a head start on that, give us reviews, and then we'll get a shirt giveaway again going here. I think that worked pretty nice. So, but he said he thinks Caleb Jones, Willie Beavers, and Will Sutton all make the team. And he says Rodney Adams, Dayton Jones, and Anthony Harris do not. And then he says both vets, Forbath and Quigley, make the kickers and punters. So I agree with that last part. And then I think I have all three of the guys that said they won't make the team. I have all three of them on.
Which three were those again? Repeat this.
It says Rodney Adams, Dayton Jones, and Anthony Harris will not make the team.
I've got Dayton Jones making it, but the other two I don't have making it. I'm with him on those.
So and then he said Caleb Jones, Beavers, and Sutton will all be on the team. So I believe you have Beavers and Caleb Jones.
Yep. I don't have Sutton though.
He did pick a couple of controversial spots for us, so
yeah.
I like that. And then we did have another user at Jack Stasny also agrees that Caleb Jones makes the cut and Rodney Adams does not. So if that's kind of been a popular belief or opinion of Vikings Twitter from what I've seen is that Rodney Adams not making the roster is, at least in their eyes, more likely than not. But I just feel like that it's Rick Spielman's own draft pick. He picked him in the 5th round. I don't think he's done anything drastically to lose that, as a 5th round pick. I think most of the time you're going to be given a spot. I hate that word, given a spot, but
yeah.
I think he's going to be on the roster, if only for that reason. I still think that's enough at this point because I don't see. Behind him, you have Caleb Jones, who really only played one preseason game essentially, and it was the last one. So obviously he did show out and perform, but I still think Rodney Adams, as a gadget guy, he does have that breakaway ability with the ball in his hands. I still think he makes the team.
We'll see what happens, but there have definitely been, a lot of bumps in the road for Rodney Adams. Sorry. It's been, anywhere from during training camp when he was dropping punts and just, was basically outshined by Stacey Coley and just in pretty much every way during training camp, all the way to the preseason where he was, like Drew said, basically exclusively used as a gadget guy. Kind of, Cordero Patterson light in terms of not being able to run great routes, but still getting some stuff done when the ball is in his hands. I see
filling out the box score too.
Yeah, I see a spot for him on this roster somewhere. I just don't think that he's ready just yet. I think that he could be a guy that if he gets cut, that he's going to end up somewhere else, returning kicks for a different team. But that's really the only upside he offers to this roster. And honestly, I think he's going to end up being a casualty of a very talented overall 53-man roster. There are some major question marks, don't get me wrong, but across the board, this 53-man roster is very, very talented when you consider how many superstars are sprinkled in across offense and defense. You've got a breakout superstar caliber receiver in Stephon Diggs potentially this year. Sam Bradford's a very good quarterback. On defense, you've got Linval, Danielle Hunter, and Everson Griffin on your defensive line alone. Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks at the linebacker spot. Xavier Rhodes is, arguably a top 5 cornerback. Harrison Smith, arguably a top 2 safety. So much talent across this 53-man roster that sometimes guys like Rodney Adams just don't quite make the final cut.
Yeah, I guess. I can definitely see it happening. I just think Spielman's history suggests that he won't be giving up on a guy that easily, that quickly. When I think not that his preseason's been great, but I feel like it hasn't been bad enough where
he hasn't been horrible. He just hasn't shown enough and to be on. And if this receiver depth chart didn't have Treadwell or Michael Floyd, for example, he'd be a lock probably. It's just that there's so much there's so much talent on this receiver depth chart that from top to bottom, it's just very, very strong and makes it very difficult for a guy that doesn't have all the tools to make the
keep
team.
In mind, I think a lot of this too, I'm giving him that spot because of the whole Floyd suspension.
Yeah.
He's not, if Floyd's not suspended, he's not on this roster in my opinion. So
he's probably the ultimate bubble player here. Rodney Adams, and then obviously the two, the kicker spot and then the punter spot are really the biggest question marks here heading in into the cut day. Again, that's at 3 p.m. Central Time on Saturdays when we'll find out what the Vikings 53-man roster will be. And Drew and I will be back here on Monday with a reaction show for that. And then we'll do some film breakdown, probably heading into the Saints game next week. That will be on through Shindig, through our little video program. Then obviously the regular podcasting schedule all week long with an immediate reaction show after the Saints game next Monday. So very excited about the regular season coming up. Be sure to continue following the About the Labor podcast. We got some really big things planned for this regular season, and we're planning to have a lot of fun. So stay with us on Twitter, as always, at VikingsATL Pod. You can find us at VikingsTerritory.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play.
Review.
Yeah, give us some reviews. Why not, right? Could be fun. And make sure to check out Black Stack Brewing and then the Twin Cities Directory as well. Twin Cities Directory has a lot of fun stuff coming up, and I think that we're going to also have some new stuff going on with our sponsors, so we're pretty excited about everything that's going on there as well. So thanks again for listening. Make sure to check and see who was more accurate, Drew or myself, when the rosters are finally released on Saturday afternoon. And we will catch you guys later on next week.